Should we always be explosive with our reps on the concentric portion of our lifts? Basically, new research has shown that with velocity-based training, so explosive movements, that it recruits high threshold motor units, which is obviously what we want when we're trying to build muscle. We want them to be recruited, and the faster we move, the more high threshold motor units are recruited. However, what we've got to take into account is specificity of training. So if you training with velocity based training, it's typically for an explosive based sport or an explosive event, so you're sprinting, changing directions, boxing, etc. And we're talking muscle growth today. Yes, we want to encourage explosive movements under control, so not just launching the weight up, but it's very much dependent on the type of equipment we're using, the situation that you're in terms of diet, susceptibility to injuries, etc. So what I mean by that is, if you're working on a cable stack, so just cables, where you can do your chest flies and all that shit, we can typically work more explosively than we would using free weights such as a dumbbell or a barbell. This is because on a cable stack we have less inertia, which means less momentum, which means we can move more explosively without having to drop off in the weight as we move through the movement. So we've got a fairly consistent resistance profile depending on how much we set, on what angle we set the cables up to, whether we want to target the mid, lengthen or shorten range of a muscle. However, with the dumbbells, free weights, etc., and certain machines, we see, well, just a lot more inertia. What must come up must come down at the same rate, basically. So if we're launching and being explosive on, say, a bicep curl, for example, we're going to be deloading the mid and shorten range of the bicep curl, which means during the mid and the shorten range, so the mid range is here and the shorten range is here, our muscles are going to be experiencing less mechanical tension, which is obviously not optimal for hypertrophy or building muscle. So therefore, with free weights, etc., we want to be using a more controlled, concentric, think explosive in some way, but it has to be under control. On cable stacks, we can afford to use a more explosive, concentric, whilst under control again, because the main thing is path of motion. We want to be accurate with the muscles that we are targeting. Moving on to where we are on the diet and susceptibility to injury, and the type of stress you want to place on the muscle. If we want to move a lot of weight, create that mechanical tension, which is vital for building muscle, we tend to have a more explosive concentric. So the concentric is if we're pushing on a bench or cable fly, it's the pushing motion, and eccentric is on the way down. So we want to create mechanical tension, work more explosively. However, if we want to make more metabolic stress, which is also another driver of muscle building, hypertrophy, so we're chasing the pump, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, that sort of thing, you're normally looking between 10 plus rep range for that sort of thing. You could do a slower concentric, so maybe 4 seconds on a bicep curl, 4 seconds on the way up, and that would cause these motor units to be recruited, but it also cause more metabolic stress, more of a pumping muscle, and that's where it meets the specificity of the target that we want, like the target aim or the aim that we want to achieve, which is metabolic stress. Similarly, in terms of injuries, so if you're deep into contest prep, just dieting, or you recovering from an injury, we can afford to use lighter weights and a slower concentric causes less muscle damage and inflammation than a slow eccentric. So by reducing the inflammation, we ensure there's less demand for the muscle to recover from. And when calories are limited, or when recovery capacity is limited, that is quite an essential tool. Finally, a slower concentric will burn more calories. Now, whilst we're not in the gym lifting weights to facilitate caloric burn in terms of a fat loss phase, generally that would be done through a deficit of cardio. It can be a minimal marginal gain down the line if you're sort of running out of room and all the playing cards have sort of been played. It can be used to increase sort of caloric burn and get you more further into that calorie deficit if your weight loss has stalled. So yeah. Also, final point, I promise. Yeah, this velocity-based training recruits high threshold motor units, but that could be on short or smaller amount of reps. The closer we get to failure, which is no reps left in the tank, more high threshold motor units are recruited. This means that, you know, if we just get within 4 reps of failure, we're gonna start recruiting these high threshold motor units, and then cause that hypertrophy anyway. So a fast concentric isn't the only way to recruit these high threshold motor units. You could also do it earlier on if you're just particularly skilled at tensing muscles, recruiting them motor units. That's based on whether you slept well, experience in the gym, etc. Yeah, and if you're using BFR straps for restriction, you can recruit these high threshold motor units earlier on within the reps, and we actually see rep speed slow. So no, the answer is no, you don't always have to move explosively. There is many different reasons why you wouldn't have to move explosively. But yeah, it's just a tool in the toolbox. Do you know what I mean? Alright then, go pump some iron, motherfuckers. In a bit.